Has been in a state of disaster for almost 700 days now. Is it time to lift the measure, or should government extend it? Is it safe to even consider putting an end to the state of disaster, with high infections being recorded in some provinces and ongoing concerns about new COVID-19 variants? Government is expected to make an announcement on Saturday. Chairperson of the South African Medical Council, Dr. Angelique Coetzee, joins us now to share some perspective on the matter. Dr. Angelique, good to have you with us this evening here on In Focus. Well, we've seen opposition parties, leaders of industry all saying maybe it's time for government to allow the national state of disaster to lapse come this Saturday, the 15th of January, instead of renewing it further. Now, of course, when we look at how the Omicron variant is progressing in other countries, United States, the UK in particular, and the possibility now of possibly another variant that has been discovered or that is being looked at. Is it time to allow the state of national disaster to lapse?
Good evening. Yes, it's a very important question that you're asking, and there's a lot of debate around this. As SAMA, we agree that it is time that we need to start thinking about moving out of under the Disaster Management Act. Over the past few months, we have learned a lot about the pandemic and what is needed to manage it. Yeah, for now, there is no need to act so quickly as in the beginning, but here's the but. However, as healthcare practitioners, we know that if the provisions to the regulations, and this is where the problem are lying currently, especially to the Health Act, are not in place, and we go into a next wave, let's say we move out tomorrow out of the Disaster Management Act, and 3 or 4 weeks from now on we get another a fifth wave coming in, we will be back immediately under the Disaster Management Act again. So what needs to happen for us to start moving out of the current Disaster Management Act is that the various departments must get their provisions to their regulations in place that give powers to that certain ministers in their domains the right to act if there's a problem. So for now, under the National Disaster Act, what happens, let's say there's something happening today. Then within 24 hours, this act allows the minister the Minister Zuma then, in this case, to implement provisions to whatever can mitigate what is happening. However, if, like for an example, the Minister of Health regulations, let's just take mask wearing as an example. So currently the minister cannot, under the National Health Act, just make mask wearing compulsory. There needs to be a provision into the regulation to allow him for this. That must be published in the Government Gazette for at least 3 months before it can be implemented. So if all of these processes are not in place, and we know that these processes are not in place, and we move out under the Disaster Management Act, we might find ourselves very quickly back under it. So yes, we need to move on. Yeah. But there must be certain provisions in place. Also important, I think, to understand that that the current Disaster Management Act, that Minister Zuma is not, however, at this stage, using it extensively. She's using there's very little of the Disaster Management Act that is actually currently in place. So as medical practitioners, we hear a lot of people say, we don't want to wear masks anymore. We don't want to do social distancing, gatherings, vaccinations, all of that. But the provisions of the Health Act doesn't at this stage give the Minister of Health the powers to implement what he needs to implement. We're not geared for this. Yeah. And if we stop this, we are in trouble. We will be in trouble.
Is there an agreement, though, at a medical level as far as managing the virus, that we have now entered a new era or a new dispensation in how we should now look at the COVID-19 virus and its many different mutations that could possibly present themselves. For example, I mean, there is a sense, I'm hearing from the advice being given by the WHO, for example, that the Omicron variant in particular was not as severe and did not, for example, commit people to hospital for longer as compared to the previous variants. Are we at a certainty level now where we can say, going forward, this is how other mutations of the virus will behave?
So, a very important question. If we look at our current positivity rate, it's around about 14%. The WHO is saying that if your positivity rate is less than 5%, you then start moving out of the danger zone, and you can start to relax. So we're still far from that. Our numbers are coming down, but we're still not out of the danger zone yet. We are far above 5%. So this means that, to use the example of the mask wearing again, if we looked what happened in the rest of Europe, they dropped the mask wearing, and there was really very, very little regulations put in place to try to do the non-pharmaceutical measurements or interventions for people. So what they did when it was first become known that Omicron is a fast-spreading viral infection, they closed their borders. Instead of starting to immediately implement mask wearing, they closed the borders. That is really not acceptable. You should first look at your people inside and see in your own country and see how you can protect them. And so if we now saying yes, Omicron is mild, which we know it is mild. We know that our hospitalization are not that high in numbers, and our death rates are not that high as under Delta, because we always compare it with Delta. But then now to say, because of that, we are now going to move to exit the state of disaster, we're happy and not going to wear masks, anything, we're not going to win. This virus, pandemic is still far from over. We don't know what this virus is going to do, what this variant will do. It might come back with the same sort of only fast spreading, and then you need to bring back the Disaster Act, because the normal provisions to the regulations in the Health Act is not in place yet to empower the minister to manage it. So, yes, we have to move out, but we first of all need to plan. We need to get the certain of these the provisions to these regulations in place for now, and then longer-term planning for future pandemics. And it's extremely important to include the Department of Health into these disaster risk management going forward.
Now, some are arguing that even though we possibly can predict that maybe there might be another storm coming around the corner, even if it does, because of the rate of